But speaking of, you know, movies that have a bit of a gritty role in it. Recently, I also watched, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I watched this in the cinemas, and yeah, like I think we were even talking about it. Like it was just like a last minute thing, that I was watching with some people, and they were like, "Oh, let's watch Godzilla." I was like, I was a bit apprehensive, but I was like, "Oh, whatever, I'll watch it." Um, Especially since like I think you know that I wasn't a big fan of the first one because I felt like um majority of the movie kind of it was almost kind of filmed like almost like a shaky camera movie,
Yeah, it was,
except for
it
the
was,
shaky
I think it
camera.
was shot in the perspective of the humans more.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like because
a lot.
because I didn't mind the 2014 version of Godzilla. The
Mhm.
same guy who directed that also directed Rogue One. And I think the
Okay.
the guy who directed it, Gareth Edwards. He's really good, I think, in doing sense of scale stuff. So
Hmm.
like I feel like people with Rogue One, it was really good with the space battles and things like that. How things looked in scale of ships and things like that. And
Hmm.
I feel like he pretty much did that in Godzilla
But
2014.
well, yeah. Well, this is the thing. People didn't. My problem with Godzilla for 2014, is what they would do is like the main thing that people want to look at, which is Godzilla fighting cool shit. But they'd focus on the little character down at the bottom. It'd be almost like equivalent of doing Rogue One, but instead of focusing on the huge battle that's in the sky, we only see it from the perspective of like a stormtrooper on the ground who's running around. And it's like, no, show us what this looks like. Show us, please, please show me what Godzilla looks like. And I think this movie does a slightly better job at showing Godzilla in the sense that like it does up like the movie goes on for like 90 minutes, 100 minutes, something like that. Sorry, no, it goes for 120 minutes, I think. And I think the thing with this movie is it shows a lot more monster fight scenes. I think there's like three major fights. A little bit of spoilers here and there. Um, there's like a major fight between Godzilla and Ghidorah, who's a three-headed dragon from space, which I totally didn't,
Space.
which I totally didn't know about. Like I don't know much of deep Godzilla lore, but I didn't know, I didn't know, and I'm not sure whether or not this is canon with like the actual Godzilla franchise that
I got a feeling it
Ghidorah's.
is. Because usually
Yeah,
people, yeah,
it sounds ridiculous enough to
yeah,
be
because
so,
people
but
rag on
yeah.
about how like all these like Hollywood critics are like, man, like this Godzilla writing is stupid, yada yada. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you haven't watched any of like the other Godzillas, like Shin Godzilla or anything like that. They're very cheesy. Aside from like the first like two or three, majority of
Mhm.
the Godzillas are very much written like a Power Rangers type of thing. It's very cheesy,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of like a shonen
I
type of
think
way.
Yeah, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like there's a difference when you compare writing from like previous eras to modern writing. People can kind of get a little bit like a little bit like iffy about it. I think like in the past, like they're kind of dealing with what they know. Like this movie had the potential to kind of do a lot better with the writing, but I think it falls short. But to kind of go back to the main kind of uh, factors in the main fights. There's like the fight between Godzilla and Ghidorah at the beginning in Antarctica, and then there's the fight between I think Mothra, not Mothra, sorry, Rodan and Ghidorah. And then later on, that kind of transitions into Godzilla fighting Ghidorah with Mothra in the middle, and Rodan kind of coming in and do it like fucking around and messing things up. And those are the main fights. But my major issue, and I don't know whether I had as big of issue in Godzilla 1 as I did with this film, but the human element in this entire movie absolutely brought the movie down because they would just cut out. They'll do the fight and they'll be fighting, but then they'll cut to the humans. And honestly, the human characters in this movie aren't well written, outside of probably Ken Watanabe, or
Ken
if I'm saying his name,
Watanabe. Yeah,
Watanabe, right? His character, while it's kind of the same
he's a
from
Godzilla
Godzilla
fanboy,
1.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Godzilla fanboy, right? But the thing is, like, he does some better stuff in this movie. He has a pretty like epic moment, like for his character development. But like a
Which is
lot
a
of
really
it,
stunning scene. I still hold that. I think I said that in my review. I'm like, I like the visuals of that scene.
yeah. But the thing is, like, it ended up being like Watanabe. His character just ended up being, oh hey, whatever the main guy says. I think like the Doctor Russell or whatever Doctor Russell says, just do it. Just do what he says. And everybody's just like, what the fuck are you doing? It really doesn't make sense that this one guy just comes out of nowhere, and everybody just listens to everything he says, even though and he seems to be the only character that's willing to actually do anything, because he's like a animal behavioral like specialist or something, and his wife, um, kind of developed this mind control, not mind control. I don't know. I don't think it's mind control, but it's essentially like a device that's able to, display dominance over
Yeah,
the
I think it's
animal
called the
by.
alpha frequency, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, and while like, yeah, it's not the worst plot device in the world. I kind of like it in the sense that like, okay, like yeah, it has this ability to kind of calm the animals down, and maybe it can be used and weaponized. And then you had like the eco terrorists that come in. You have the guy who was from Game of Thrones. I forget his actual actor's name, but he kind of comes in, steals it, and you have the big scene with like kind of Mothra at the beginning. Things like that are okay because when you're trying to introduce things, it's okay to have it introduced through like human characters. Throughout the movie, however, the human element, there's way too much focus on humans. I think like if the animal, if the animals, if the Titans in the movies have like maybe like 30 minutes compared to like 90 minutes of people. And honestly, like I think it kind of suffers because again, I kind of get it. I kind of get that you can't just throw millions
CGI
of
after
dollars at
CGI. Yeah.
CGI, right? I get that, but at least then you have to at least make the human characters good or the story good. And I think it consistently fails, especially having the I think Millie Bobby Brown, her character is essentially just a girl who's like the daughter of both of the main characters in the movie, and essentially she steals the device to later be able to try and distract Ghidorah from trying to take over the
It's
world.
kind of a bad
Now,
plan because like when I first saw it, there's like a scene, like pretty much very early on in the first like 20 minutes, where for example the wife, Vera Farmiga's character, she's gonna waken up, I think Ghidorah or whatever it is in the ice.
yeah. Hmm.
And then you got Millie Bobby Brown character touching the ice, and there's some weird shot foreshadowing almost of like when she's touching the ice, she's doing the alpha frequency thing, and I thought they were gonna do a whole thing of like, even if the device is gone, she controls the alphas. Because she
No,
technically
that would be
the implantation of the alpha frequencies inside of her. I thought there was going to be
that
some
would
sort of
be
element of that.
that would be even worse than what was in the actual
I don't know. I
movie.
thought that's where they were going.
I mean, it would have been an interesting way to do it. Like maybe it's like the frequency, because essentially what it's kind of revealed, like the way that the alpha frequency works is they're borrowing it from two different sounds, one being Godzilla and the other being a human frequency. Maybe if the human frequency turned out to be like Millie Bobby Brown's like cat, but I don't see how that would make sense. Like you'd at least maybe try and I don't know. Like it just seems like a pretty yeah. Maybe if it was written, I'd be more better with that being a thing. But I think the whole thing, it's like she goes to the stadium, she somehow survives. Like none of the main characters died in this movie. I
I
felt
don't
like
know
more people
about
should have
that. I don't
died.
know about
Oh
that.
well. Look, people. Okay, the one character death should have happened. Like I don't care about her character. That's all I gotta say. Like it's not that great. It's the thing I kind of hate in movie. Here are two things that happens in the movie, right? So Millie Bobby Brown's character is like the classic like thing that they tried to do in like the 80s, 90s, where they'll have like a kid kind of come in and like the movie maybe suddenly centers around like what the kid's doing and
It's
like
basically Stranger Things, which is Millie Bobby's band whole career so far.
but it isn't Stranger Things because her in Stranger Things at least is grounded in the rules of the world. Like the rules of this world seems to give her like plot armor and a lot of other people plot armor, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's no way they would have survived like a huge there was one stage where Godzilla gets dropped like from a high
Altitude.
distance in the sky, right? Altitude, right? And yeah, and I'm like, nothing would have survived something being able to drop like that, like the force that would have came out from that movie, from that creature in this movie, right? Uh, and again, this is the thing. When you set the rules, if you want me to believe the rules, you have to have some kind of consistency in it. And they just kind of picked and chose when they wanted to follow the rules and when they didn't. When they wanted to make the actual creatures dangerous and when they didn't, you know. And the other thing yeah, that's the thing. I really hate that in movies when they especially it's a thing that they should stop doing uh in movies not centered around children, right? Like if it's not like a child-centric film, it seems very out of place to just suddenly have them play a really high technical role. It seems very out of place and very unrealistic. So it's definitely not Brown's fault because she's obviously being given this direction by the people who made this movie. She kind of executes that the best way that she can, and she's not at fault there because
Mm.
because what can you do? She's a child actor. There's only so much you can expect, especially when the direction's bad. It ultimately comes from the fact that it can be kind of tropish in the sense that like in old comic books they put in Robin because they thought, oh well, the kids will implant themselves in Robin and they'll have him to like interact with Batman, and that's like them interacting with Batman. But in pure reality, anyone who's read a comic or anybody who watches like a TV show, nobody ever really likes the sidekick. It's Batman. You put yourself in Batman, or you
It's
put yourself
Batman.
in Superman. It's always, yeah. Well, that's the thing, or whatever, right? It's never about like these ancillary characters. And very much in this, like any child who's watching this movie, um, they probably wouldn't even care that Millie Bobby Brown's character is in it. Like they don't need other kids to care about it. They're like, oh, giant lizard. Like that's all that matters in it. So it really confuses me as to why they had that as a plot device in the first place when essentially it doesn't. It's just like this roundabout way that they went with designing the film.
Well, it's not only
The
that, but it's like
second,
also there's I feel like there's a semi disconnect between the scientist and Godzilla and what Godzilla's doing, as well as kind of like the eco terrorist, I suppose, and what they're doing. I know I felt very disjointed, especially when it came to like the mum and the daughter. I'm like, it's very weird. Like the whole
yeah, it's
like
like
the eco terrorist stuff is like there, but it's like there for like 10-15 minutes. Like at that point, don't even establish it.
yeah, and it's the thing is like the eco-terrorism stuff is pretty interesting, but it's like, oh well, Millie's character will just come in and oh yeah, I'm just gonna do all these things and like Tywin doesn't do anything. He's just like, why is your daughter in here? But then he doesn't get like a bunch of his buff like eco-terrorist like gang to try and like pull her out or anything. Like nothing that actually makes him sound or like you believe him to be scary. There's one part where it's like, yeah, you can tell like they're meaning business, which is like I think the beginning at like when they're on Antarctica. But a lot of the time it's like they're just there for show. And ultimately, like, yeah, there's some stuff that might happen in the next kind of movies that kind of involve them, but it's whatever. The other trope that I really hate, which they do sometimes in movies, is when they establish like a bad character. And in this case, like again, spoilers. Dr. Emma Russell the mother ends up being the person who kind of sets the whole eco-terrorist as component of this movie to happen, right? Because she is working with them to try and wake up all the Titans for this really dumb reason, by the way.
Because
May
humans
I
need to
mention?
die.
Yeah, well, no, but she doesn't say it's because humans need to die. It's that because the ecosystem is like dying, and like because of human influence, having the Titans anywhere that the Titans go, their radioactivity and where they, all the lava and all the kind of stuff that they do bring up like new like it revives like the ecosystem, like like some a place that would be a desert or something like that. When like Godzilla goes through it, because there's all the lava and stuff, it has like very like nutrient rich soil, and that leads to like trees growing and stuff like that. That's essentially what they wanted to happen, because that's what happens to, I think, New York. I think that's where they initially start off, right?
Yeah, that's
Because
true.
it becomes like, because it's a complete like forest, like a jungle almost, after the events of the previous movie. And yeah, and then subsequently, yeah, so she's kind of the reason why all this bad shit is happening, because she's working with the eco terrorists. She more or less is an eco terrorist. The thing I kind of always hate in movies is when they establish like a good character being bad, but then towards the end of the film they make the bad character good, because she essentially self-sacrifices herself. I
Yeah,
think
the real question
I
is
think
it
it's
justified?
well, it's not really justified. Like, it makes sense as to why she would do that, but it's like she has a change of heart. She's like, oh well, I didn't mean to wake all of them up, right? It's like, why couldn't they make her character more interesting in the sense that she wants everything that's she's become like, because all this happens because her son dies during the events of the first movie. And both of the parents are kind of viewing how to deal with the son's death in different ways. The dad is trying to move forward and try and do good in the world, whereas it could have been done in a way where she saw it as, oh well, the world, everybody has to feel the same kind of pain I went through because I lost my child. Like, that would, again, not a lot of the premises that a lot of bad guys have are super rational, but the point is that you kind of understand like where they come from. And I think a parent losing their child would be a very understandable base point, especially if you kind of put it as a kind of a background justification, which she mainly uses, where the real reason she says it is, oh, the world, she basically has Tywin Lannister's goal, right? She's the one who's like, no, the world needs to be reset, because humans are destroying it. It would have been more interesting to have her just be the villain,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it just be like a bait and switch. Like, you think it's Tywin, but it's really her, right? She's the one who has all these radical
The
ideas, and
power
it all
all alone.
yeah, and it kind of stems from the idea that, oh, I lost my son, and that kind of is the seed that grows this kind of ideology that she then becomes an eco-terrorist about. And it would have been more interesting, because I kind of hate these like last minute redemption arcs that these bad guys sometimes get, because then it's like, yeah, you assisted in killing millions of people because you wanted to slightly reset the earth. You're a good person now because you died and you sacrificed yourself. It's really dumb. It's no like it could have been Dr. Russell, who could have sacrificed himself, and he's the good guy. So it's like the good guy sacrificing himself, but they always make it the bad guy, because
Because
it's
like
like
if
they
you
do
think
it with,
about the future of the film, it's like it doesn't revert back to zero, and it's like, yeah, you probably have crimes. Like,
yeah, you go to jail, or something like that, which is the reason why when they don't want to, when like in like superhero movies as well, right? Like, when they don't deal with the, if the main character doesn't directly kill the bad guy indirectly gets killed, either by their own incompetence, like, let's say they have some device that's gonna make him into a superpowered dude and they stab themselves, but then like oh, it turns out the serum that I take destroys my body. Oh, it's my own fault I died, right? It's like it's kind of like self-suicide, but like to further the plot, right? It's like this really lazy way of writing, that I don't like. And they could have, by just changing a few things, could have made the movie slightly more. Because I think you must admit it does sound more interesting if you kind of make her character the actual main bad guy who doesn't have a redemption arc.
Well,
Um,
that's what that I completely agree because what I was saying before with the story is disjointed. It's just that like Tywin Lannister's character, Charles Dance, that's his name.
mhm.
He doesn't really do much in this film, anyways, and that's why I'm like, at that point, why is he even in the film?
Yeah.
It's like he just there. He does like a few lines here and there, but that's really it. And I think there must have been like early drafts of the script with it, like things that would have changed, almost where it would have probably been more of a bigger role, and then they're just like, nah, let's just do this, but we want to keep the scene of like the bigger reveal where she's been on their side all along. And I feel like they kind of wanted to keep that, but at the same time being like, well, we can't have this character do this, so we're gonna do that. So like I can see that.
I mean,
Yeah.
and here's the other thing, right?
Or
Like,
maybe it's linking to the Godzilla versus King Kong movie. I don't know.
oh well, yeah. I think it definitely is, because I think there's a stick around for the post-credit scene, guys, for this movie. But I think the thing is, like, I think Godzilla versus Kong is coming out in 2020, so I don't think they're gonna have they're gonna have Millie's character in it. But I can imagine, like, if they're gonna do a proper Godzilla sequel, a couple of years later, they might have Millie's character. 4 years from now, she'll be 18, 19. Like, the actual actress will be 18, 19. She plays a 12-year-old in this movie, but she's 15 in real life. So I think they could definitely do something like, okay, 4 years later, and have this movie with Millie Bobby Brown in it. I think the thing is, like, if you compare, you've watched the latest King Kong movie, right? Kong Skull Island.
Yes.
Now, would you say that a lot of that film focuses on, like, humans, or is there probably like a good split between monsters, or when I say monsters, because there are other monsters, correct, like lizards or
Mm-hmm.
something. Is there a good split? And is there, like, maybe like a more even split of monsters on screen compared to something like King of the Monsters, or would you say that it's similar?
I feel like it's probably a better split because not only is it just Kong and other monsters, but it's more like I don't know, there's more of them. Aside, I think that's the difference, is because like with the I think Godzilla type of stuff, it's more like it's Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and like and those are kind of like a handful of monsters. But but you have a lot of like army characters and all these supplementary characters, like Samuel Jackson who plays a character in that. And there's like, it's more like Kong Skull Island is set in an island where it's like prehistoric age. So then it's kind of like a thriller type of them trying to survive this island as well as trying to hunt down Kong. So it makes it automatically a better premise and more engaging, rather than being you're in New York City or in Boston and there's just like one or two big like monsters around. So it's very much different in that way. And I feel like since it's done in a particular, I don't know, it's very weird because I think I've mentioned before, Kong Skull Island portrays humans as easily expendable, easily killed. And it's very interesting in how they do that. And I really kind of enjoy that look. Rather than, because like over here, there's probably in King of the Monsters, probably maybe one scene where a person dies. I think it's like a guy ejecting from the jet, like straight away.
Oh yeah.
But like,
That's right.
Kong Skull Island has a lot of that, where it's like humans are disregarded almost, and it feels like mostly kind of like a impact of like it's Kong's story, or Kong is the one that cares about, you care about him kind of almost. So it's framed in a different way that makes it, I guess, more engaging.
Well, I think ultimately that's probably why I think a lot more people, like, I didn't even know that Kong Skull Island is like canon in this film until, like, like a little bit like after maybe how we talked about it and how they were going to get the movies in. I didn't know that they actually planned the Kong Skull Island movie to actually be like a like a direct sequel. I thought that was its own kind of thing that they were doing. But I universally hear praise about Kong Skull Island from reviewers and moviegoers, whereas like moviegoers seem to enjoy this film. But I think like, you know, if you're going to compare like a kaiju film, right, like Pacific Rim is a much better movie than this. You know, from what I understand, Kong Skull Island is a much better movie than this. So I think like there's a lot of things that they have the potential to do, especially with the IP. But ultimately, like, you know, they just didn't pull it off. Again, it is better than Godzilla 2014. And if you like you know, giant monsters fighting, there is some of that in here, but prepare to just like listen to cringy bad acting in between.
Like I think I mentioned in my review where it's very much is, it reminds me of a 90s film, like in the way it's framed. It's kind of I guess dialogue where it's kind of cheesy. It's very much like an Independence Day type of movie almost. That's what I kind of got out of it. I'm like, oh, it's one of those types of films. More, it feels like more like a disaster film where
I mean,
people are just like trying to figure stuff out.
Like okay, what about the other Godzilla movie that came out like years ago? Like I want to say like in the 2000s, right?
Yeah, 1999. Yeah.
1999, sorry. And yeah, like I watched that as a kid, and as a kid I enjoyed that film, but watching it as an adult, like yeah, it's a cheesy film, but like at the same time there's a lot of spectacle. There's a lot of Godzilla in between that, right? There's two monsters kind of moving around doing the stuff, and while there is a focus on like humans in that, but it's also humans kind of dealing with Godzilla, and then later on like dealing with like Godzilla's kids, and you know, these like mini Godzillas like running around and stuff like that. So you know, I think like even in that way that movie was more entertaining than like the first like kind of reboot Godzilla film. I just hope that maybe what they might do for, you know, they're obviously doing Godzilla versus Kong coming out in 2020. It would be interesting if they do or finally introduce Mechagodzilla in some way. I think that would be super cool, like to try and do their own kind of like anti-Godzilla weapon. Like that's what they have to do. Like the nukes or whatever, that anti-oxygen bomb doesn't work against him anymore, so they have to make a giant robot to fight Godzilla, and that justifies having Mechagodzilla in the film.
But he's our guardian, like, you know, like
but
what is it? You know, he's that guy's character is gonna be really annoyed.
Well, he's dead. All right. And to be honest, like I think even in like the classic like Toho Godzilla films, like they always backflip, like flip flop between Godzilla being important and then like being an ally or an enemy, right? And it's always like Godzilla's an enemy at the beginning, and then an actual real life enemy comes in. I say real life, but like, you know, an actual threat comes in, and then Godzilla and the humans work together, or at least like the humans let Godzilla do his thing,
and then
he kind of fucks off.
And
well, but then the movie ends. Like that's usually, whereas like I think in the films like with Mechagodzilla, like they use Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla, but then Mechagodzilla becomes like a nuisance, like it goes like crazy or something like that, and so now we need Godzilla to stop the Mechagodzilla from destroying all people. Like, and it's like that kind of classic thing. I think you know, if you like giant monster films, I would probably recommend watching Pacific Rim, the first one only. But yeah, like if you like Godzilla and you're a fan, like, you know, there are some classic monsters that are in the movie. You know, Godzilla, obviously, Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan. Although that being said, I don't know whether or not Mothra and Godzilla being like an item is canon with the show. I don't think
like I said, that little like scene where all of a sudden Mothra sacrifices herself to power up Godzilla, that was in a South Park episode. So I got a feeling someone parodied something. Like I don't know that, because that's my thing. Because when I watched it, I'm like, I saw this in the South Park episode in like 1999.
They memed it, but
like
whether
that.
or not, but I think there's a difference between the you know, like it being like Mothra gives its like kind of like in a Dragon Ball Z-esque, gives its energy, its radioactive energy to Godzilla, and oh, Godzilla and Mothra used to fuck. Like that's essentially what they say in the movie. It's just like it just throws all things out the window. But that's Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And speaking of other movies that have a lot of monsters in pocket-sized form, I recently also watched Detective Pikachu, or Pokemon Detective Pikachu.
Because they really want to spin this off, because it'll be Pokemon, whatever it is.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that would be a pretty cool idea. I think the movie didn't get like a lot of from like it got mixed from people I've heard from. But I like this film. I think it definitely jumps the shark towards the end